Hi everyone, welcome back into the studio. Well, I get a lot of questions about, painting. How do you extend acrylics? And then how do you paint with acrylics and the different types of techniques that go with it? And even though I show you in a lot of the videos, sometimes I feel I might confuse you a little bit by using those too much interchangeably in my painting. So what I plan to do is I'm going to do a couple of videos here with one first with a landscape with rocks and then one with the floral where I use pure acrylic. I have my palette out here. There is no mediums. Normally you see me add the open medium or the extender medium out. I'm not. I'm going to paint pure acrylic and I'm going to paint with just water. And the Heritage do dry just a little bit slower than most acrylics because inside the acrylic we actually have extender medium. But it is hot out there today. It is 95 degrees and the air is very dry. So these acrylics will dry very fast here. So we have to use a technique that works with those acrylics. And that technique that works the best with acrylics that I have found over all these years, 40 years of painting with acrylics, is the halftone technique. And the halftone technique, I actually, and I have a book here that I show you that I'm going to recommend that all of you get it. I have 4 copies of it. I have a hardback. I learned so much from this book so many years ago. And it's actually in oils. And you've heard me talk about this artist all the time. His name was John Howard Sandon, and he passed away a couple years ago, and it's a huge loss to our industry. But I am reading his book many, many years ago when he wrote it. He talked about the planes. And so you look right through here, you see the planes and the planes and values of the face. And I went out and I painted all of his examples, and I went out and I bought the bust and I put it in different lighting sources. And you'll see the different planes, and you can see a lit plane. This is called a transitional plane. This is the shadow plane. This is the receding plane. And so you as the artist, you've got to be able to look through and see these different planes, and you break up. First, you're painting up into those planes. First, you break it up into the light plane, the receding plane, the shadow plane. Then you put in transitional tones. And if you paint like that, you don't have to blend. As a lot of times, and he goes through many different lessons here, and these are his oil lessons. But he's talking about halftones and putting into this face. This is the preacher, and he is. It's beautiful how he puts in the tones, the marks, the tones, and it is a beautiful painting that he does of this gentleman. And it's a step by step of how he paints this, but he blocks it all in with different types of tones, halftones, and stuff like that in the upper third, lower third. And each one of those marks and tones sets a plane of that face. And that completely changed the way I approached my painting. This was many years ago, how I approached my painting. And this is the book. This is the book I want you should all get. I highly, highly recommend. And whether you're painting oils or painting acrylics doesn't make a difference. It's all in planes. And then you have to look at how you are going to adjust those planes, and then how are we going to soften those planes, okay? So that's what I'm going to show you today. And I'm going to do it with acrylics, and then I'm going to start doing it with extended acrylics. With extended acrylics, will work more like oils. Now, the oils can do either one, but the oils cannot do layer glazing techniques that acrylics can. So each media that you paint with has its limitations to it. But I am an acrylic artist. I chose it because A, of its non-toxicity around myself and my grandkids and stuff. And B, it is, to me, the one, after being an oil painter for a number of years and then switching to acrylics. Acrylics are the ones that have the most versatility because I can slow them down or dry them fast. There's others that agree with me, and that is fine, okay? I like what I do, okay? And I'm going to show you. Okay, so let's go. So what I have here is I have a couple of rocks. I'm going to turn it into a little stream. We're just going to paint for a little bit. Whether I turn it into a painting or whatever is immaterial. I'm going to show you the technique, okay? So I'm going to paint some rocks right here, maybe some, and this is a photo I got off of Photoshop, Adobe Photo Stock. and I may put some water down through it. I love the light passage of the lights and shadows through here. So I may eventually want to turn this into a painting. But the rock, let's look at the rock. So light is coming in here. You can see this is the shadow, cast shadow. So light is coming in this way. It's hard, really kind of hard to see right here. This is the light struck plane on each one of those rocks. So it's coming from the upper right here, hits that. This area right here is the receding plane, and this area where you see the cast shadow right down in through there, that's the shadow plane. There's not a tremendous amount of difference between the light and shadow. There's a shadow plane, a receding plane, light struck plane. Here is a light struck plane. This is the receding plane. This is the shadow plane. Okay, so as we start to base those in, we base those in like that. If we just block it in, like Sandin says, this starts your, and he calls it basically a poster blocking in. Put it in the tones, the light struck tones, the shadow tones, the receding tones, and then you do what is called transitional halftones. And then I do what is called broken color, which a lot of artists do, is broken color on top of that. Those are the techniques I like to play when I paint acrylics. Let's get into it. So my standard palette, okay, I do add out, when I paint rocks, I do like to add out this particular color. This is the medium beige. So all the colors and everything I do is listed in the colors, the description, the video description below. But I do add a lot of medium beige out because it's a beautiful neutral color, okay? And I do like adding that. So let's go in, and I'm just going to put in some colors here to start this out. I do, if I'm going to do kind of like a summer painting, I like the sky, and I don't know how much of the sky I'm actually going to have on here, but I do like to start out with a violet. And when I paint pure acrylic, I like to paint with the largest brush possible to make those marks, just like John Singer Sargent said. I like the biggest brush possible. So I'm going to take some of my light color here, and this is where my sky would come through, right up here, and maybe just pull that through right in there. You might want to just toss some of that down right in here, because we're going to maybe put some water in there. But up at the top will be the heaviest, and I like to, you know me when I paint these, I like to add the atmosphere. So I'll do a little crisscrossing here. I'll take a little more blue, maybe a tiny bit of violet. And I work, this is acrylic, and I don't have to, work too fast, but I do like to work with a big brush. You see a big brush gets it on real quick, and I like to do that so I don't play around in it. I don't need to play around in it. And the one thing that you're going to do, if you're going to paint with fast drying acrylics, you have in your mind a plan what you're going to do, how you're going to do it before you approach it with the acrylics. Know what you're going to do, what your goal is, so you don't sit there and play with it to think if this is what I got to do. So see, this stays wet long enough for me to manipulate and work some of those colors. Maybe I wanted a touch lighter right up around in here where I would have a little distance going into the background, going into the back, if I decided to put some of that in there. I don't know if I'm going to do it or not, but we're going to leave ourselves open for it. So a little bit of light. Now, into the back here. And I'm just going to set it up, and then I'll draw some rocks. So right back here, I love this with the trees and stuff like that coming here, and some other rock structures up here. I might end up turning this into a whole painting. So this would be a good point to do a quick study. Using acrylics like this, doing quick studies are great ways. So I'm gonna pick out some of the coloring and stuff like that I see in there. Maybe go down to like my 1-inch brush here, and I love the burnt sienna and the greens, and I'll take some of that maybe with a little bit of my blues here, but I love that burnt sienna tones right in through here. And I'm gonna, this one climbs, or actually falls down just a little bit. I'm not gonna worry too much about that. I'm just gonna put in some colors here that, modeling it through like this, that would eventually be like marks of trees. Now I'll come back. This is quick setup. What's it going to look like? I'll come back and, maybe even put in some sky holes. You can come back in, and this is what it gets really pretty, is like I could come back in, and sometimes I'll completely switch the tool, even the color. So maybe this time I don't add any violet to it. I come back in and I'll add in some light coming through into that painting. And what I'm going to be looking for is these broken edges and interest and stuff like that going on. Not to be perfect. So let's just take some greens and some burnt siennas, some of these colors in here, and I will take my knife and see, this is why I like the knife. See these broken edges that go in there? Those look fantastic as we start to develop the painting, because they're the interest of the painting, the lines, the interest. So we might put a few trees in here, and I'll show you. I've shown you before how I do this, but yeah, we'll carry some of this, and we'll maybe push some of this forward. Now, you can, a lot of times I won't even soften that. But see, the color that I put on right now, I don't need to rush. The color I put on right now is wet, and it's going to stay wet, and I know it's going to stay wet because it's thicker. Over here where it's very thin, it'll start to dry real quick, and it already is right in here. See how it's starting to dry? But over here, it's real thick and real wet, and it's not going to. And so I have lots of time to kind of soften my movement here. Soften the edges. I want to soften the edges, which is what I'm actually painting is the through areas, through of the trees and the light and stuff going through. So I have lots of time to soften this. But you look at something like this and you see all these edges, you're going to emulate it. Now, over here, this is starting to dry over here a little bit. How do you soften that if it's dry? Well, water. First off, your acrylics are water-based. Water is its solvent. So all I have to do is rinse my brush for a minute, and I don't have to rush at all. With Heritage, you have probably about almost 2 hours to do this. So you got a lot of time. But I just put a little water in my brush and come through, and the water softens it out and allows me to soften through here like this. So I can soften anything. I can come back with some, let's just say some blue. Let's say I want to put a little more blue in there, right? This is a soft acrylic. Heritage is a soft acrylics. And let me just say this right now. Not all acrylics do this. I have developed, as a paint chemist, I was a paint chemist for years. I developed paints for that were, for acrylic paints that were made to dry hard and fast so people can manipulate, put other layers on top. Heritage it can do that, but you have to give it some time to dry. But you don't necessarily have to. You can come back, and I have lots of time to work this and work with a little bit of water, and I can come back and manipulate my sky a bit more, come in and soften some of these back areas. If I want to come in, or I can just tap a little bit of the blues in here, soften some of that, and I can come back and work a little more brighter blue sky maybe. And if I want it softer, I'll do more mixes on my palette right here, and then I'll put the mark in. So I'll go ahead and put the mark in. I don't need to blend that much if it's already soft in my brush here, like that. So I'll put some maybe through light. So what I'll have is some of these through light. Now I may cover some of that up. But if you want to soften something at any time, now see this right down here is kind of dry. How would you soften that right now? Well, later on I'm going to show you halftones, okay? I'll show you halftones. But right now, for the longest time with acrylic, what you have is water. You just put water in your brush and pull through like this, and that does your blend. Water is your solvent, right? And so I want you to think of that all the time. Water is your solvent. Water isn't what makes these acrylics dry slower. No, there's a lot of artists that say that. No, that's not what it is. Water, as far as the Heritage, if you put Heritage out and you put water out, water will dry before Heritage, because Heritage has this in it, and this is what dries slow. Does that make sense? So when you add more water, to think that you're going to extend its drying time. No, you're actually making the paint dry faster than it is drying slower. But water is its solvent. And so I can use water to soften, any of the edges, anywhere that I want. Here where it's dry already, because it's warm in here and the air is very dry. Here where it's dry already, I can just take a little bit of water, just pinch wipe my brush with a little bit of water. And sometimes you see me like this. Sometimes if I'm painting a lot, or right here, see, this is completely dry right here, right? And I know with the Heritage, I got an hour or so, or two, I could do this, but I just missed this right here, right this with the water. Just missed it with the water. Let it set for just a second so that the water, which is the solvent, can go into the paint and then just come back through this, and you'll see how it picks up and starts to blend? I can pick that up and start to blend that edge again, just like that, as the water comes through that edge. See? And I can soften it out. I can take that water right up in here into the blue now, and I can do that. Even though it was just dry just a few seconds ago, I can do that. If I wanted to, you see me work with my finger. If I wanted to soften, now see, I like movement like that. I wouldn't soften it, but I'll show you. Just mist it like this. Just mist it with that for a little bit and let it set for a second. And you can even just take your hand like this and push through and blend off that just lightly. How much pressure? I'm not using much pressure at all because this paint is soft. And I can blend off that area right there until it becomes soft. Does that make sense? What is doing it? Water's going in, water's the solvent, water's breaking apart the bond of the acrylic, and you're now manipulating it. Okay, so, and it's easier when the paint is thicker. So this paint here, and let me show you. So I put some of that in and blended that right here where the paint is thicker. See over here where the paint is thinner, that gets dry really quick. But over here, this paint is still wet, see? This paint here, that's not too bad. Pull some light through there. See, I could come back and manipulate all of this. These are all different techniques that I might let something tack up a little bit so it starts to tack and then start to pull through little light edges and stuff like that where I might want to see light coming through the areas of the trees and stuff that I might put in there later. There's thousands of different ways you can do this, okay? But you got to understand, water doesn't make the only reason why it might slow something down is because you're using more of it. But water is a fast drying product. If you really want to extend your acrylics where you have, a long time working with them, use more of this and get rid of water. Replace all water with this, and then it dries slower, okay? All right. But we don't need that. I'm going to show you that you don't need that, okay? So for most of the painting today, a lot of you have been asking me to do some more work with the filberts, and I'm going to do a whole series here with the filberts. One of my favorite painting filbert sizes are the 10 and the 8. I love these two brushes. I'm going to do most of this with the 8. So let's say we're going to paint some rocks in here, okay? That's what we're going to do. We're going to look at these rocks that are right here. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of my beige, and a tiny bit of my blue. These are some of my favorite grays in the rock colors. Let's just sketch on some rocks here. Let's sketch on kind of one like this. Let's move it up into the painting here so we can leave some room here. Maybe develop a beach or something like that, or an edge of a shoreline or something like that right up here. So first one of the things, I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna set, I don't want him right exactly in the center. He's gonna be kind of the center of interest here. And, but I do want him to dominate this painting. I want this rock to kind of dominate the painting here, okay? So that rock is going to be there. It's actually a little longer onto this one side, I could think, but I'm trying to leave myself a little room right in here to maybe put this other, let's put another little rock right out here, move it over a bit here, and let's put that out there. And then I do like this one, maybe not quite so pointed, so high, as it comes right down here. Onto this side, there's going to be its receding side, maybe a little higher, right like that. Okay, these are just ideas. And So I'm just sketching with a little water and some of the paint. I do like, let's not line this one right up with that one, but let's put him a little bigger right here onto this shoreline. That'll be over here. Let's darken that a bit so it's easier to see. A little bit darker here. And put in the plane. I look for the planes. As I'm drawing this, what I'm looking for is the actual planes. And then right out in here, there's going to be other rocks. And sometimes when I have those other rocks, and I don't know exactly what they're going to do, sometimes I just do this. That gives me the impression of the rocks, and that's all I need right now. Let's just make some light and shadow here, and just put in the browns right in here. That's going to do there, and we'll paint some other rocks, and we'll paint some water and stuff coming through here. And this is how I do stuff. Maybe I'll bring up another, like a rock right in here. Except many times I paint rocks with the palette knife too. This is actually a painting knife, and I always call it a palette knife because we all call it palette knife, but the painting knife has that Z bend so you can hold it flat against the surface here. So let's just maybe put another rock right there, and so we'll leave some trees. So we'll bring some water right down through here, maybe a little bit, maybe just a little bit of a beach or something right here. All right, now let's talk about painting a rock. So what we're going to do and one of the things that Sandin talks about is value. One of the first things you do is value painting, light and dark, light and shade, but you divide it up into its planes. So we're going to have a light struck plane. So I'm just going to take some of my beige and my medium beige and some white. I'm going to keep the value light up around 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere around in there value-wise. And so I'll start out my rock here with a light value. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be a light value there. And let's go ahead and toss this into the light struck plane here on this rock here, right? Okay, and maybe some more out onto this rock. Slightly add a little more blue or a little bit more beige or something like that so the rock changes color. We call that the broken color of it. And if I like a color, I'll turn around and add it to the other rock, like maybe a little bit of the blue right in there that just picks up some of the... And blue's cooler, so I tend to use it more towards the receding plane or the shadow plane. So we have all of these little planes in there. I don't break that up first. I don't break that up into, okay, that's a receding plane to the second power. No, you don't get that. You divide it into 3 planes: the light struck plane, the receding plane, and the shadow plane. The shadow plane is going to be basically our burnt sienna and our blue. Sometimes I use a little green in it. Sometimes I use a little violet. These are all broken color parts of it. It keeps the rock very cool, very dark. So here will be the shadow plane right in there. That's the majority of it. Now, sometimes I do this. So when you're looking at sanded and stuff, this is the harsh line of it, okay? This is the line between basically your lightest plane and your darkest shadow plane. So, and you can see, you can really create a sharp edge to a rock. And when you create sharp edges to rocks, like if I wanted to keep a sharp edge right onto this rock right here, the more value difference I leave between the light and the shadow, the more sharp edge that rock is. So let's just go ahead and let's put in a sharp edge right here, right onto that one, right? And maybe a bit onto its shadow right down in there. Right now, if I, so I can leave it like that and I can leave a sharp edge. And if you're not sure, go ahead and leave it sharp edge. We're painters. We don't have, it can dry up. It doesn't make a difference to us. It can be dry. It's not going to hurt me at all in my painting. Let's add a little more blue to that. Drop that down, a little more blue, a little more violet. Make that a little darker back here, right? And that other rock plane right back there. Maybe a touch of it back here. Maybe a few touches of this back. And this is all I do with like back rocks. I do a lot of them. I just say, okay, here's the shadow planes, and then I let it get a little lighter and smaller as it goes back, dances back along the water's edge there. Sometimes I'll take some of this down into the water, marks of it into the water, just blur it off like this. It doesn't, just real quick. What happens if this starts to dry? Okay, let's just let that dry for a second. And I want to soften it out. I'm going to rinse out my big brush here while that dries for a second. And I want to soften it out. This is one of the reasons why I love a 3/4 inch brush. I always call this it's my brush of choice. It's my softening brush too, but I will keep it around with a little bit of water in it, and it's the brush that I can use. You can even see I can pull right through this blue. Watch this, because that's just happened. Even though this blue is dry, right? What do I have underneath there? The white. And what I did is pull right through to the white. So see, that paint can still be lifted up, and that's what the Heritage is designed to do. Now, you don't want to press that hard. You want to just blend that out. You don't want to press that hard, okay? So you don't press too hard. You just softly come through it. And as the water mixes up with the paint, it will start to soften out again like this. It's very similar, those of you that have painted with gouache, it's very similar to gouache. We took this acrylic and actually pushed it into very similar to a gouache. So I can use that, but we might want to add some of these darker colors that might help us later on with some water. So now I've got the light plane, and it's not really as light as I want, so maybe I come back in a little bit more beige and blue and white. Let's just add one more light plane right into it. Now, do I have to blend that off? I'm going to show you. I can do it right now. Do I have to? No, because I could take water and soften it off in a few minutes, right? But I'm going to be concentrating today on halftone techniques. What is a halftone technique? A halftone technique, or this would be, we wouldn't be a halftone here yet. We would be what's called a transitional tone. What is a transitional tone? If the light values, if my values are very close together, you're using a transition to slowly transition the eye. If my values are further apart, I create a halftone. It's a standalone tone that sits right between the two. A transitional tone can soften really easy, but halftones can soften, but they still can maintain their own character. That's difficult to understand. I'll show you as we get on, okay? But you're going to listen very closely as I talk about this, guys, to when I'm talking halftone or transitional tone. That tells me how close I am, those tones are to each other, how much space. So these tones really aren't close to each other at all. This is a light tone and a shadow tone. There is no halftone in between here, okay? The receding edge here would be a halftone. So let's just talk, what is the receding edge? Well, first let me fix this. So I could take, just while this is drying up here, I can take just a little water with my soft color right here and run that right there like that, and I automatically soften it. See, just boom, right across there and soften it. Or I can say, okay, that's that color there. This is where I was. I add a little bit of blue to it, maybe a bit of this brown, and I create a tone right in between the two, and I take that right there, and all of a sudden I have it blocked. So when the tones are very close to each other, that is called a transitional tone. And all I did was look at where I was, what I had, and I made a color right in between the two. Doesn't even have to be perfect. Let's say I want to soften that mark. I'll just take a little bit of this transitional tone color. Let's just soften that mark. One mark, one stroke, one mark does that. You don't need oils to go, You don't need that. And Sandin is saying that about painting the face. You've got to preserve those planes of the face. And if you're going back and blending, you want to keep your color so wet that you're blending all that you can blend and blend and blend. You're not doing the work on the palette that you should be doing, making the tone. I'm a tone painter. That's what I am right there, okay? All right, so I might leave some of that interest. I like that. That's too smooth for me in part of painting. But now these are both dark. This is dry. Well, it's not quite completely dry. Let's let that dry a little bit more. See, I could soften that even let me just do it right over here. I could soften that right there. I can even just take, and this is why sometimes you see me on my palette, keep little drops of water. I'll put that in my finger and I'll just push. And I'll push that right into its middle tone and blend that out. I can do that. Because here it is, this is an acrylic that's designed to do it. You can't do that with all acrylics because some of the acrylics and some that I designed are designed to dry very fast, very hard, because they're made for layering techniques, okay? Here it is made for blending techniques and softening techniques, okay? And if I don't want that to happen, I got to let it dry a little bit more. But the other way is, see this color that's right here? Matter of fact, let me take a little bit more water. Let me push a little bit more. Soften that tone together a little bit more. See that tone that's right there? That's going to tell you what your halftone is. So my shadow tone is there. My light tone is here. What I got to do is create a tone. Let's use my number 8 here. I'm going to take some medium beige, a little bit of the blue, a little bit of the burnt sienna, maybe a little more blue, some white. And I want to make a value. Here's the light color, here's the shadow color. I want to make one right in between so I could have a little more light to it. Probably somewhere around in here. And if I touch it right up there, see how it disappears right into there? I'm real close. This will be my halftone color. Here, probably just a touch. I like my halftones to lean slightly dark. So, and I might use that color just like that and then vary it a little bit. This is what I would consider the broken color part of it. So here would be your halftone, what we would call in this rock the receding plane. Okay, so I have a light struck plane. I have a shadow plane. Right in here, I'll push in the receding plane of this rock. So right here would be the receding plane. It's not on the light struck plane and it's not the shadow plane. It is the receding plane. So right here. And I can make this look, so now I have those 3 planes, right? 1, 2, 3. Let me put this light back up here so we see this plane a little bit easier. So you see the 3 planes again. Because I'm going to be changing it like this all the time. So let's put the light struck plane, right? Here's the light struck plane. Boom, and let's just get that right up here. Let's get back to our 3 planes on the rock. The light struck plane, the receding plane, and the shadow plane. The shadow plane is the plane sitting furthest enough from the light source, right? Now, if I want to start, so here, if I do this, let me rinse this real quick for a second, and if I leave a sharp edge between planes, I can make a sharp edge rock. Does that make sense? If I want to make a rounded rock, I need to smooth out those planes. So if I take some of my receding plane, even some of these, this is what we call transitional planes. So if I take some of this right with some of this, and I'm going to make a plane right between the 2, and I pull that right there, I start making a transitional plane. I start to round the rock. Does that make sense? Now, to soften that, I don't need to blend that. I need a mark. So I was right here. What I do is I head over here to the darker, and I put a mark right here that's slightly darker, and all of a sudden that rock starts to round. I was right here, right there, right there, right here, it goes in there. I slide over to the light side. I come right in here, and I'm watching this value. Here's my light, here's this, and I'm creating one right in between, right here, and I'll drop that value right in there. And I left a little mark there, so I drop back to here, and I correct it up. And this is where I start working small marks to start to correct little bumps and stuff like that into the rocks. And I'm watching my values, sliding my values closer to the light as I head up to the light plane, and I start painting the rock. Does that make sense? Okay, but I'm always watching my rock. Now, light's coming this way. I can deepen. So once I have my planes, my 3 planes, I can slowly start to soften and work other colors in to give more definition to the rock, right? My 3 planes. My light's way up here. And so let's refine it. I want to go a little darker. There's where I am there with that dark. Let's go a little darker. Let's go even a little darker, more toned right in here. And let's put in just maybe a little more shadow down in there on this side of the rock. I'm just going to take my finger and blend those together like that a bit. Right like that. So now all of a sudden I got even more shadow there. Maybe I look and I see a line of shadow or something right here, and I can add that into that rock. Do I want to soften that? If I do, I've got to go maybe up to this value. Maybe this is my original medium value. I got to come somewhere in here with a light, with a mark to soften that line. Does that make sense? And one or two little marks, touches, I could just touch right there with that color and I soften that mark. I can touch right in here with that color and I can soften that. I don't have to blend those together. I soften the whole transition of that painting there. And so what I'm doing is applying these colors, right? And I'm applying them in such a way that I'm creating a transition. So right here, right here where I have the light struck and this actual closer to a shadow mark. I know my light struck is going to be right up here. It's a little blue, so let's add a little bit of the blue up here to it. Let's actually sometimes you'll see me come in and I'll restate something. So I'll restate a little light. So I know my light is right there. My shadow's down in here. All I need is some kind, does it make a difference? Any kind of tone in this area right here. In this middle area, maybe a little more blue to it, will soften that first line right there between those two. And I'll go back and forth a couple times and I'll start to soften it. See how the rock starts to round? If I leave them without pushing it down, the rock will not round. If I take and so here, if I leave that mark, the rock is sharp edge. If I start to do this, just paint back and forth, adding that tone. I'm adding the transitions here, and I soften it up both ways here. All of a sudden, my rock rounds. Do you see that? That's all dry. I'm not blending anything. I'm working the tone. I'm just keeping an eye on my palette here. Light, the mid-tone, the shadow tone, the very, very deep tone. These will be transitional tones. So this is actually considered a transitional tone. So here's where I was. And if I wanted to soften it even more, this would be if I came right in here and made this tone, which is right in between this light and right in between this one, maybe slide this just a little bit more. This would be even more of a transitional tone. And if I wanted to, if I get it on there and I go, oh, okay, what's my choice to soften that line that I have here? My choice is to drop down here. Let me just put a little bit over here. Drop down there and push that tone in. Each time dropping a little bit further down towards my dark, which softens it out. Or I just reach in. I'll just do it with pure water here. Grab a little bit of water and pull through it and soften out that rock that way. So I can soften this whole thing, that whole rock off that way. So I start painting that rock and getting that rock round, right? The whole trick to the halftone technique, whether you're an oil artist or whether you're an acrylic artist, is maintaining your palette here. Don't get it all jumbled up because it helps our eyes see the values. And normally I have it here. My daughter came through and cleaned up my thing. I usually keep my value scale there. Oh, which, by the way, we redid the JansenArtStudio.com. Go over there, click on the Jansen Art Studio, and they'll see a thing up in the top menu called Downloads. And you can go right there and download all the value scales. But those value scales become very important when you're starting to paint for, and add interests and stuff like that as we start to work through these rocks. Now, so what I do, like when you saw me paint the westerns and stuff, I then start adding other colors, broken colors to these rocks. So I may come here. Burnt sienna, I love burnt sienna. It's a nice glowy type of color. I usually add it somewhere towards the shadows, right down in there. So I might put a little bit of burnt sienna into that side of the rock there. Then I'll maybe soften some of the edges here with it, soften it into some other colors. And sometimes you'll see me as I work through these tones stabbing the rock like this, especially with the acrylics, so I start to get some different types of edges to these rocks as I'm working it. And I'll go up here towards the light, and especially, let me just take a little bit of water, some of my medium tone or transitional tone here, and just start adding that to break up some of this light plane right in there. And I'll add some of the transition there, the halftone back there to paint that rock. And I'll go right back up here towards the light, maybe a little bit of the light working into it. And I start to develop and work this rock here, building it and building it. And sometimes as I come into the real light, I'll grab the real light here and I'll start to add that. You'll see me also, which is wonderful in these painting techniques, to grab some of this light like this with the knife and pull that right along the rock here, right? And see this, watch this when I get this. This is what I paint for. So I'm going to take this light and I'm going to drag it. Well, let me just do this so you see it real clear. We add some more halftone down here. Take away some of the light, add the halftone in there. Let's just get rid of those little bumps there. And I could add it with a touch of water to smooth it out. But this is what I love to do. So I'll take some of this light right on my knife. I hold it light pressure and I drag down like this. I'll drag that light pressure across and I'll start getting some of the color differences. Sometimes I come back with the dark and push that in like that to start making the texture on the rock. And sometimes here's a little bit of blue into this one, a little lighter and a little bit of blue. That starts to create the textures into the rock there, see? And, so now you look at this transition that's right here. So you look at this rock. So you start, once we have this transitional plane in, the three planes. So we have the light struck, the receding, which is a transitional plane, and then the shadow. Then I can start breaking it up into smaller little units, maybe a little burnt sienna, a little bit of light, and I'll make this kind of a different color right here. And we'll come in and let's just paint that plane into that rock right there. So now we have that plane, see? So now I start breaking it up into other planes. Usually right up along the top of the rock, you might have a little bit of shadow. So let's just add a little burnt sienna and blue. Sometimes I'll I'm a mixer. I'm a tone mixer. I like to mix the tones. So I watch my tones. I keep them very clean there, but let's just put a little bit of a shadow tone right up along that edge, right? Maybe come back with some of this other tone, just touch in, just like that. You see, I'm not blending it, I'm working the tones. Let's transition this tone a little darker right here, right towards this edge here. Maybe right here, take that edge, just blur that out a little bit. So now I'm starting to break this rock up into the different edges here. Maybe that other little shadow mark comes right down here. Maybe we leave that little shadow mark. Maybe I take a bit of my lighter little transitional tone right there, touch into that. Sometimes I'll just blur it with my finger lightly. And I'm starting to make all the little undulations that you see in the rock. So as I see right here, slightly little lighter bit of the burnt sienna right there, so a little bit lighter. So I know it's a little bit lighter than what I was just using over here. I see it, and I'll come right in here, right in and see that transitional light. I'll test it. That might need to go just a touch darker, maybe just a bit. Let's add that little mark right there as I start to paint that rock. So it's going to go just a little darker than this one. It's into the category we call the transitional tones. So we'll add that right in there, right up there like that. That's a beautiful little tone sitting on that side of the rock, right? And then I'll slide in here to a little bit darker. Maybe I can leave that edge. Matter of fact, I'm going to leave that a little darker, not quite that sharp. Maybe a touch of the water, so I thin this out, back some of my transitional tone right in here. I'll soften that edge right there with a little mark, right? So as I develop the rock, I have its three planes: light struck plane, shadow plane, receding plane. Then I start my transitional planes to make the rock round if I want it to rock. Then I start looking for other little planes inside this rock that might give it some more interest. Does that make sense? And I start adding those other little planes. Let's add a slightly lighter, it's going to sit between these plane, but not as lighter than the transition part of it, the receding plane. But see, it's just another little plane that I'm just adding. And I can enhance that with just a little bit of shadow up at the top, which a plane normally gets. And now all of a sudden I've got another little rocky surface. And what it is as I start to paint the rock, my eye is breaking up all of these planes. Does that make sense? That's my goal, is to look at this in some of these planes. Maybe I want to have a slightly bluer, so I'll come down here, a little more blue into this, right? So it's a different kind of gray. It's darker, it's right in here as the value-wise is into my transitions, which is kind of what I want. Maybe just a little lighter, so it's than that transition. And yeah, that's going to work. Let's pull the angle down like this, so we start to set another sloping kind of plane on that rock right there. So if I wanted to make it look like so my brush mark gives the slope. Does that make sense? My brush mark gives the slope. And so if I want to really pop it off, I put the slightest little shadow right on that edge and then let that pick up. Does that make sense? Boom, there it is. Now I have to decide, do I want to leave it that sharp, or I'm right here. Do I want to head this way, maybe a touch more burnt sienna? Sometimes, and I love green. This is where I start to paint broken color. There's a nice little fly right there. And so I'm not that dark, right in here, maybe right in there, and I'll start adding other little transitional tones, little broken edges of that rock to make it look like it's going other ways or other things, and I'll start pushing in other colors. Does that make sense? So this is what you see me doing. And so everything that I'm doing here is pure acrylic. And I don't care if it dries or not, because I'm painting in a tone that is perfect for that particular area. Does that make sense? So as I start to build and paint this rock, and so I head back up over here, maybe a touch of yellow as I get into my lighter tones right here, and I want to set the light struck edge there, and maybe just tap and drag it out here. I don't have to do any blending. Just tap and drag it here to make some of the marks there on the rock. And then you start adding the other colors. So let's just say, I love to add broken color. Broken color is I start to use a slightly different. Now, so here is the rock is slightly greener. All right, so a little bit of green into this. And I know this is more of a transitional type of tone, but I'll push some of that, maybe a slightly different mark. I'll push some of that color into the rock. Maybe a little bit of that can come down here. I can lighten that plane of this one coming down here, since it's got to go a little bit lighter yet. Right there is that rock is going to come into the water there. And this is a nice sharp line. Sometimes I'll take a little bit of water and I'll make sure the highlight is inside the rock, not on the edge. So I'll put that line down there. Now let's bring some of that highlight right in. See, just a quick mark and that softens it. I can tap through here and see I create this rock that starts to look all kinds of blended and everything like that. And I'm all pure acrylic. And you know, I love this type of stuff. See this real glow that comes right there. And I love to add that. You saw the one Western that I did almost there, where the guy and his pack horse are almost to the watering hole. I put this glow into those rocks, and I really liked it. So I would look at this and I go, okay, that's it's actually up into value-wise, it's up into the transitional tones, which means it's up in the mid area here, which means I need a little bit more value-wise. This is going to be a glowy little tone right over there, and I'll look at it as it's going to glow right there like that, okay? And then and then I can say, okay, so this is the tone I use, but it's dry. This is why I like the Heritage. I'll rinse my brush here for a second, grab some water, and just paint right through it and pick that tone up. This thin like that, that's all I need, is that thin tone. And I'll just push that in and see if I want to leave that glowy little mark that's there. Maybe I want to restate some of those, bit of those shadows here. Just tap into them and set those shadows in. I love the pockmark kind of things you can put into the rocks here. So as I start to refine the rock, I'll start pushing in and doing more things, right, to it. And we can add more lights, maybe a little bit, take the green, a little bit of our sky, and the blue slightly lighter, and add little marks, little drags through that give more feeling of textures to the rock, you know. So you can drag some of that down, lighten some of this up a bit. These are all transitional tones now that I'm adding in here, moving through. See how I'm moving my brush through? That is giving more interest and stuff now into that rock. Does that make sense? And then before I go do any water or anything like that, I'll take some of the tones, especially into the darker tone of this rock, all my 3 colors here, and I'll paint the rock down into the water here. And because that's what you're going to see in the water is that rock, because the rock isn't going to stop at the water, it continues into the water, right? And I'll add some other little things here, maybe some other shadows over here. I can get some of this a little bit darker here, put some of the shadows. Sometimes I'll paint this so I imagine the rock into the water, and then I imagine the reflection of the rock. That's another thing. Let me rinse this light color out of this brush here, and I'm just going to take water. I just take the water and I just run through here like that with a little bit of water, and I can soften those edges off, right? Works pretty well. Or I can take some of my blue and a little bit of my violet here. I can take my sky color, something similar. It doesn't have to, I don't like it to always be the same, but I can take some of my sky. Matter of fact, let's leave this a little darker. Thin it out with a little water here, and we'll leave this traveling through here like this, and we'll start setting this rock right into the water here as we start to paint the water here. And all of this that I'm working with up there, let's get some lighter color, a little bit of the violet. I like that. The water, the stream, if you're putting in a stream color here, is going to be basically the sky, right? So that's what it's going to be. So as I start to base this in, we'll base in and push some of this in, and just like I do with the rock, I'll start adding different colors and stuff like that here into that. And see, this is all wet. See, I don't need to blend any of that stuff. That's one tone overriding another tone. And it just looks amazing. And it's all painted with acrylic. But you have to, when you're painting with the acrylic, you have to keep your mind on the tones because there's no blending and softening it. And really, the acrylics are, oils are very forgiving because you can just sit there and paint, paint, and paint. Acrylics are not as forgiving as the oils. But the acrylics can do a lot of stuff because I can sit here and say, okay, now that I put on that blue, I'm going to take this blue, thin it down, and maybe cast some of that blue right here, right now, just thin like this, as almost like a watercolor, right into that rock, and start harmonizing that rock right into the water here. This is where I like the acrylic. So I'll start pushing some of that blue and those colors in there to make that, maybe this is a little too much, so I'll just push a little blue into it and take some of that glow away. But so here you see the values of the rock. So if I come back here, I like that sharp edge of that rock, but if I want to soften that edge, my shadow's down here, my light is up here, my light was right up here with it. I have to put any kind, and I like a kind of a gray kind of color here, any kind of halftone will start to soften and round up the rock. Right? So there I've got my first rounding. So this would be some of the halftone there. Now, so this is a receding plane, which is a halftone. This is a shadow plane, which is dark. This is a light plane. This is a light plane, highlight plane. So now I just take some of this halftone and I put it between these two planes, and it starts to round it off. Now what I do is my transitional plane. So I'm right here. I head towards my light, not all the way to my light, so towards the light a little bit more, and I come right down this edge here, and just one mark, and you see it soften, right? And usually what I'll do is I'll take the mark, and then I'll drag it across a little bit. Okay. Now on this other side, I go from here to the shadow side of it, and I create a transition between my halftone and my shadow tone, and that's going to be right down there. And all of a sudden, I've created that going, see how it's going darker and darker and darker here. And I could take that, I could tap it up into here and create other little planes of the rock and stuff like that. What I do is I start tapping that, once I got that tone, I start tapping it around a little bit, and I create other little planes and other little things happening there inside that rock. Does that make sense? And maybe I reinforce my light plane here. I take a little bit more light. I'll reinforce the light plane, and I'll leave the marks like that, and that's my light, and I'll drop right down, and I'll pick up some of this, and I'll go right next to it. Here, I'm a tone painter, and I'll go right next to it there, and then I'll slide. I see I got a mark between those two. I'll slide back up towards, pick up a little bit of my light, and I'll soften that out. So once you start to paint like this, you start getting faster and faster and faster because your eye identifies those tones. Right now, your first one, what do? You break it into light, the middle, and the dark. And you just hold your value scale with it. You have a light, a middle, and a dark. And then you start adding the transitions. And I come back and I'll re-scrub some light into it, just tapping the marks in there. And I leave the marks because that leaves the puck marks and stuff like that that you have in a rock. And I start adding other little tones, little marks, little edges of light, little light struck edges and stuff like that that accentuate those particular planes, or little edges of dark. Let's just take a bit of this right in here, and a little bit of that dark. So you come in here and say, ooh, I want to accentuate that dark plane. So I'll maybe leave it a little bit of more of an angle there or something like that. Or maybe I want to bring that edge so it's a little bit more sharp. Maybe not completely sharp, but a little bit more sharp. And all of a sudden I don't like, and this is dry, so I just pick up a little more paint right there. Don't like that, so I just tap it over with a little transitional tone. And you can see you can go back and forth and paint these rocks all different kinds of ways. And so, you can come out here, and if I'm painting a light source, I set my front rock here for as much light that I want it to catch. I want this rock actually to catch a little more light. And this is the thing you got to remember about acrylics. Maybe I'll put a little bit of blue into this because I love the blue too. It gets it more gray, not quite as warm. See, I love that bluish color in there as well. And these are all tones I like to work into the rocks, right? But, let's say that I have to work this, and I work this, and I work that center of interest, and you see me, whether it's flowers or whether it's anything else, where I come back and I revisit that center of interest, because acrylics dry a value darker. They're different than oils. They dry a value darker. So you think you have it right, then it dries down and goes darker. So then you have to come back and add more light than what you think sometimes. And that takes a few times through to get the light, I find, for me, it takes a few times because I'm not a very brave painter. I approach it a little bit slower. But as I start to head that rock a little bit closer to this one and stuff, it's going to take a little bit more light. And this rock actually comes down a little lighter to the water line. And see, I can easily start to paint that in there or blur these edges over and start to add all of that interest. But all of this, you get some of those different edge, interests and stuff like that in there, different tones. Everybody's going to paint rocks a little different. And some paintings, I don't have much time and I leave my rock like this. Other paintings, I'll start to develop them a little bit more interest. That's the real difference that you start to see in paintings between a $1,000 painting and a $100 painting, is how much time did they spend inside developing those tones, those shadows, those halftones, those transition tones. And, good collectors, good people can see the difference in that, see the difference in, how much that, energy and stuff like that you're putting into that particular painting, So, so maybe we leave a little bit there. Not quite as dark. Here we'll go a little bit lighter right down here through this transition here. And that sets your rocks, right? So if I do a painting up through here, I would, you could have a lot of fun with a painting like this. You could set in and pull some, like you've seen me do before, come in, set in and pull, grab all these colors. These are all good colors and stuff here. But you come in and start adding tree trunks back in here, and then you start some big wide ones right up front. And sometimes I'll just pull the line, and so I get a nice wide one and some thin ones and stuff. And then you can come in, take some various greens right in with some of those burnt siennas, and you can start adding the trees, the leaves and stuff like that you're going to put inside of this. And you've seen all the different techniques I've showed you with brushes, with everything, and you could add all of this interest and stuff in there and slowly here build it up. And so as you add some of these other rocks, so you start building a painting like this, you start adding other rocks. So maybe I don't make this back here as light as here, even though in that photo, boy, it's really quite light. You could put a real bright light one back there where that little fly. I'm going to make it maybe a little more gray, not quite as light. We'll darken it here first a bit. And I'll look, let's develop a light tone right up here. Here like that. It's not quite as light, but that's pretty light. So I approach it a little slower. So I'll push. I'm going to maybe have to do this one with you guys as a bigger painting because I think it's going to be kind of neat to do that. Into there, let's reinforce the transitional tone, the receding plane, right? Let's go a little darker, maybe. And I love red and blues. Beautiful color. A little green in it maybe here. Let's reinforce that edge. Take some of that away. There. So I got that nice point. So now you can definitely see the planes there. Here. And let's leave it a little sharp right there, maybe. There, see? So all of a sudden, you see, it's getting to be a nice, and if I leave just a little more contrast on that edge, I make the rock look a little sharper. See? See that right there? So, but this rock is way back there, so we want to keep it back there, but I can poke different brush marks and stuff like I've shown you all different kinds of ways, and I start painting the rock, and that rock starts taking shape. So here I got its plane. You see, real simple, I got its planes. I'll darken down just a little bit, and we'll shoot some light on to that one plane. Maybe leave that edge, and all of a sudden that becomes, as they get further back, your rocks are easier and easier and easier to paint. The question becomes is, do you leave it like that, or do you put in a transition? So I'm here. Do I put in a transition like right down here that is going to make that rock start to round over? Does that make sense? Right there like that. That rock starts to round over. So it's no longer the edge. If I take this and I leave it like that, I can push that edge back in. Maybe I want to leave some of those edges. Maybe, and what I tend to do is I look at that color and it's like, yeah, I can travel that color a little bit into a few areas on my rocks to bring in some edges or something like that. Little marks here, especially the rocks up front, they start getting, you could start seeing pock marks in them and little things, tapping them a little bit there and there. And you can really get there, but you can see how easy it becomes. Let's take some of this light with this, and let's put in the light plane right here. Maybe a little heavier, a little more gray, a little more light, a little heavier right there. Boom. And then let's just slide this way to a bit of our transition tone and just soften that real quick. And then let's go down this way a little bit more, maybe a little burnt sienna into that. We'll leave that point out. A little fly, this wants to be here. Let's just soften that transition right there a bit. But maybe we want to leave a bit of a harsh line, so I'll go down to my darker here. Maybe not quite as dark as I had it there, and a softer little line right there. And I start painting that rock. And then I start breaking it up with halftones and broken color, what we call broken color. So maybe this rock gets a little red and green. Change that up to a little bit of green. But I'll mix it into this area so it gets a little bit lighter here, right? But I'll mix it up here. It's not in the highlight and it's not down into the shadow here. So I got to keep it up into this value. So as I add those other little bits of tone in there, maybe in here, some of this. See, I can instantly start making more rocks just by painting those tones, tapping those tones around, coming back up this way. Maybe a touch of yellow, warm it just a bit. Different color, broken color. Add a bit right up there to that rock, right? Adding a little bit of that warmth, a few of them here. There, all of a sudden I'm starting to get these rocks and everything's starting to come together, right? And then you're going to do, when you paint the water, we'll probably paint the water because we're at an hour. And so I don't want to overwhelm you too much with too much to think about, but it's all value, guys. So, and I don't need a whole bunch of stuff to say something. Let me just do something here with the water real quick. So I'll take some of my shadow, nice violet shadow here, and let's just wash in some of this, and I'll let this kind of skip around. This is how I like to paint it. So I'll put in some of the shadow, and then I'm just going to lighten some of that up, maybe a little bit more blue-green, lighter. Get into my medium values here and just drag that around here. Boom, right up over that edge. I don't need to blend these. I'm making the marks. I don't need to blend those, right? And if I take off too much of a shadow, I just go back and put it in. And to create some mark, some rocks and stuff, I pull down, right? So I just pull down that shadow. But you need the shadow. Here's just a bit of water. You need the shadow to set them into the water. Let's grab a little burnt sienna with that. So if I wanted to set this rock in, let's say I'm going to make water pull right down through here and come right down in here. Create a little pool of water right there. And then I come out with that tone, and then I'm going to walk up like this and create a few other medium tones that are going to come right in here. They don't need to be blended. They can be in, because water moves, it's the movement. And that's what's giving it the movement. Does that make sense? And then I start to lighten it up. And this is what's going to, and some of the lightness of the water is what's really, and you just kind of tap this around, maybe pull down a bit as it's going to come down through that area. And if I get too much, I do this. And artists do this. We paint back through it several times. We're painting the movement of it, right? And we'll tap in and paint, but I don't need it to stay wet. I need the movement of the water here, right like that, and tap in some of this. And so sometimes it's going to take me a while to build that particular movement, or that movement that I want, right? And usually on the back side of the rocks, and this is where you go and you look at your photos, it'll stay a little darker right here as it's calm right before it starts to fall down the rock here. So I'll push some of this back up there like that. And then as it's falling down, we'll pick up some of our blues and some of these other little things, and this water will start to fall down. Tap as it gets a little bubbly here, right? And there, we'll let that, some nice transitional tones here. Boom. Maybe a little bit more blue right in there as that's coming down. You might want to put, if you're working in here, put another edge of a little rock right there. I think that would probably help it fall a little better if it had an edge of another little rock. And, like most things, I think rocks are drawn with shadow more than anything else. We'll just use the big brush here. But the edge of another rock right there coming through. And it's fun, and it is. It's fun to paint. So that's a little quick light, but you get the idea, right? And that's where it gets really, really fun. And so as you look at some of the other videos I did, approach them with a little different, I want you to approach them with a little different eye, in that watch the values and the transitions that I'm painting, because some of you haven't paid too much attention to that, and I want you to start to pay attention to those, because those are the ones that's the ones that really make the most difference into our paintings. Now, as I come down here, I'll take some blue and some of that, and I'll paint some of the down, just pull down It doesn't have to be wet. Okay, wet. All the wet does is it shortcuts your ability to have to make some of those halftones, transitional tones on your palette. That's all the staying wet does. But you can stay wet all you want, and I mean, you can paint dry like this all you want and do some really, really pretty things, you know. So we'll soften this edge right there on that. Soften that edge right there on this particular rock, but then you can push them all in there. So it's a value painting, and where you're going to get the most interest, like if I wanted to really do a master technique on that particular rocks that I did here, I would consider this right now, believe it or not, I would consider this base coated, because I've set up all the planes and everything like that, and now I'm going to come in, and there's one thing I still have not painted for, which is the very best thing for interest that you can have within your paintings, and that is texture. And I haven't done it on that one yet. So, and I would be putting textures and stuff in here. But you can see how keeping an eye on my rocks and what I do is I can drive a tremendous amount of interest. And if you wanted to follow that one a little bit closer and stuff, you could. I can take some of my light, paint out, change some of the shape of this rock, round it off a little bit more. It is a little square, maybe round it off. And I would do it with a halftone or something like that. But I could put other rocks. I mean, this would be a fun painting. Take a little bit of this color like this. So if you carried some of this water right here, even right back up and around and through and into these other rocks back here, leave this one out into the water a bit here, you can have a really nice little, you know, start developing a really nice little painting here, you know. Put in some of the shadows and the lights and start really developing a nice little river scene, some sky, paint in some trees, you know. I love to do brush techniques and dragging and edges and stuff like that. You know, like if I'm going to do trees, I love to drag stuff around like this and create some of those, start building some of the interest. And so I base coat, and then I start looking for shadow marks, and I'll base those slightly different. But you've seen me do this 1,000 times on the channel, you know. And sometimes some of the quickest ones are the prettiest ones that you can put together. And they work really, I mean, they're a lot of fun to paint as well. But that'll give you some ideas and what I do. And I would just build it all up and build it all up and build it and all that kind of stuff. But it gives you the idea. See, that looks like it's really, really blended, and I haven't blended a single thing on that. It's all tone painting. So I do recommend you guys, you know, because it'll give you a different vision, and that's what you do. You know, you don't necessarily copy everything I do, okay? But you let me change your brush, just like I let Sandin and I let Sargent and, you know, Couchois and all of the artists that I study. I let their brush change my brush, giving me some other ideas and ways to do it. And you put it all up in here, shake it around a little bit, and out comes your technique that you like to use in painting. And that's why I'm always studying. I am always studying. I am always studying and looking in inspiration and new artists, because I'm constantly changing, and I always will be. But yeah, and I would, you know, this is a good base coat start of it, so, and you can continue on and you can go finish it if you want to do that. But boy, if I'm going to put that much work in this, I'm going to go a little bigger and paint it up a little bit more. But once you finish something like this, then try putting out some of this. And the only problem that you have when you go from pure acrylic to start adding some of those thinners is we tend to paint a little long in it, and we lose all of those nice tones, those tonal marks that give you all of this movement. And remember, you want to leave some of those marks, those movements, just like painting the portrait. It lets us see the planes of the face, and this lets you see the planes of the rocks, right? So yeah, so you can see, and if you start blending too much, boy, you know, you lose all the interest in your rock. And I can bring it back at any time just by revisiting those planes. And I see onto this one, I'll leave a little more burnt sienna on it. If I start to add some more of my shadow planes in here, that rock starts to come to life some more. Does that make sense? Here, and leave a few marks here. Let's add a bit of that shadow right into that one there. And it starts to come to life a little bit more. Maybe this one right into here. That's really a lot of fun. Once you start to understand it and practice it like this and paint the tones, it's really a lot of fun to paint this way. And that is a pure acrylic way. We're using just water to paint that, but you've got to paint the tones. So I just did this. Nice little review. Here you go. I'll just do it again. There, I got a line. Now, do you want to leave that line? Or do you want to soften it? How do you soften it, right? How do you soften it? There are two ways. What's the two ways that I said that you can soften it? Don't ever, because I showed you a lot in the last of the video, tone, 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 tone. Don't ever forget, you can still take your brush with a little bit of water right along that edge. Maybe push just a little bit, and you can blend those together or smooth the color exchange of those two and soften out the rock a little bit more. Maybe manipulate this up like this and create another plane right there from what is in your from what is in your brush. I can create other little transitional planes here and do that, right? Always be aware what's in your brush. Always be aware that that water is your solvent, and have a good time, okay? And those of you that haven't yet, consider coming on over to the Facebook and put in the Academies of Art. That's our group. You can post in there and do that. Make sure you go check out our brand new website, the JansenArtStudio.com. It's not brand new. We've just updated it all, and I put in one page. That's going to be the page for downloads. You can go over there and download all the material about the paints and brushes and stuff like that. And then there's a newsletter page. If you're not getting our newsletters, there's a newsletter page that you can go over there, sign up for the store newsletter so you get all the specials and stuff when they are released. And then there's a newsletter that I do that I talk about paintings that I'm releasing, paintings for sale, paintings, videos. It announces videos when videos are there. And I also sometimes post in there, and I'm going to do a lot more of it, some of the techniques that I use in the written, so you can look at it. And some people print those off and keep those as reminders around their studio too. Different techniques like halftones, transitional tones, shadow tones, light tones, transitional tones, and halftones. All that stuff. Get that all straight up here, okay? All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Gives you an idea. I'm going to go over to the Paint It Simply, and I'm going to paint some flowers over there using pure acrylics. And then my next painting that I'm going to do up here, I'm going to do a more formal one. We'll add just a little bit of the maybe the open medium or something, so you can see the difference between the acrylic, and then you can start to judge when you go acrylic, when you're going to paint pure acrylic, to when would you go over to maybe take it to an oil or something like that, or closer to that other wet, because you can paint pure acrylic your entire life like I did for years. I painted pure acrylic like this for like 10 years before I started adding other things, okay? All right, enough talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure that if you have questions that you write them down, and I'll see you guys here on the next one, okay? Bye-bye.